What you're actually hearing is a guitarist trying to find ideas on the spot, has no preconceived ideas, no stock licks or anything. This is a courageous effort to go out and perform in front of thousands of people with nothing prepared in terms of your guitar solos. Hi, it's Janet Hansbach. In this video, I'm going to go through 10 of my favorite Frank Zappa guitar solos. At number 10 is Sto Holmes from the 1981 album Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. Now, there are a few reasons why I like this solo, and I'm going to explain some of them as I go through my discussion, but the first one I wanted to note was the sound of the guitar. Now, Zappa recorded this solo in his home studio in 1979 and plugged directly into the mixing desk. So whenever you do that with an electric guitar, as many of you may know, is that you get this very clean sound. There's a lot of clarity to it. However, you miss the colorization and natural distortion that you get when you plug into an amplifier. And of course, you're missing the ambience of the room. The guitar that Zappa uses on this particular recording is the acoustic Black Widow. Now, this guitar was designed in the late 1960s by Paul Barth, who set up a company called Bartel Guitars. But the guitar was branded by the Acoustic Control Corporation, better known for their amplifiers. But they manufactured a couple of hundred guitars in the late 1960s, and there's that photo of Jimi Hendrix playing one in the studio from 1968. There are a few oddities about it. For example, it has a 0 fret. If you look at this picture here, you can see that it looks like an unfinished fret between the first and the nut of the guitar. On the back, you have this vinyl cloth that covers the electronics. The one that Zappa uses on the recording is being modified with EMG pickups, which he notes on the album. Going back to the clean sound, in some ways this gives Zappa the opportunity to be more restrained when he's playing, I suppose. It's very sparse. It obviously has its characteristics, but it's just the phrases, the timing of the phrases that is markedly different to the solos that are usually played with distortion. Now, this adheres to the principles Zappa established in the late 70s of xenochrony, where you take musical parts and sections from different locations and different times, and you put them together to create a new musical performance or a new musical interaction. So Zappa had taken a pre-existing Vinnie Colaiuta drum track and aligned that with a rhythm guitar track by Warren Cucurullo and improvised a solo on top of this in his home studio. And Warren Cucurullo was in the studio at the time of recording, was sort of commenting on how profound an experience it was to watch Zappa just plug straight into the mixing desk and play this incredible solo. And apparently in payment for using the rhythm track, Zappa gave Cucurullo his Vox Winchester guitar. Some of you may have seen this guitar being played by Ike Willis. This guitar was given to Warren Cucurullo, who then used it a few years thereafter. The other reason I like this solo is because it's the closest Frank Zappa ever gets to sounding like Wes Montgomery. And I find this quite novel. There is a section in there around about, I think it's bar 57, there's about maybe 12 bars where he's just playing these sliding octaves. Now, Zappa was a Wes Montgomery fan and on several occasions had mentioned him in interviews. For example, there's this interview from 1988 with Alan DePerna, and Zappa was talking about Johnny Guitar Watson, Guitar Slim, and Wes Montgomery's Loverman as being kind of the ultimate guitar solos. And he said that Wes's version of Loverman was one of the most important musical statements I ever heard in my life. A year earlier, in 1987, Frank Zappa says, "You hear Wes when you hear him play. He puts his personality, something about him as a person, into his playing." And in a short article from 1967 called My Favorite Records for the Hit Parader, Zappa says that if you want to learn how to play the guitar, then listen to Wes Montgomery. Now, the solo is in D Mixolydian, and Zappa has tuned his low E string down to D. The opening phrase he plays is really beautiful. It's a very simple phrase. It's simply a descending major pentatonic. Which is then followed by this very, very complicated polyrhythm. We have 13 quavers in the time of 8 crotchets. I will look at that in more detail, but I'm going to try and play the first few bars. I'm going to play to a metronome to guide me, but also for you to hear the polyrhythm with clarity. So let's have a go. So you can hear that friction there with the 13 in the time of 8 crotchets. I just wanted to quickly go through the notation in the Frank Zappa guitar block. Now, there appears to be a little bit of a problem here because there's 13 in the time of 8 quavers across 2 bars. Now, this is impossible because there are 16 quavers in these 2 bars where you have this 13 in the time of 8 polyrhythm. So my guess is that this is a copying error. It's written as a quaver and it probably should be a crotchet. That would make sense. It would mean that, 13 quavers are being played in the time of 8 crotchets. Well, at least that's what I'm doing when I play to the metronome. I'm thinking of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 13 quavers in the time of 8 crotchets. There's also an incorrect note. Here you have A, appears again and again, but clearly in the recording it's a B. So I spoke with Steve Vai about this in one of my interviews with him, and he mentioned that there were some errors, and this happens. This does happen. But if you're paying attention when you're learning these parts, it's relatively easy just to navigate them and to try to cohere to what's happening in the music and what is happening in the notation. At bar 57, Zappa starts playing these octave slides. It's very Wes in this kind of... and this goes on for quite a few bars. So I like that. I like the fact that Zappa sounds like Wes Montgomery for a minute. The first kind of deviation, I suppose, is where he's playing... He's going to the sharp 4 here, so we're implying the Lydian dominant sound. And as the solo progresses, he starts to use the octatonic scale. Now, this is a real rarity in Zappa's solos. He has used fragments of the octatonic, but it's very rare you hear him play that in a guitar solo. And this is a really good example where he's playing the scale, this whole half diminished or octatonic configuration. And then after that, he then plays the whole tone scale, implying the D sharp 5 chord. The solo is very sparse. There's a lot of space in there, and you can hear Zappa really carving out an interesting improvisation, completely spontaneous, but really experimenting with these odd rhythmic groupings, these complicated polyrhythms. And most of the time, the polyrhythms seem to be sort of stretched. They're not these fast little tuplets that you hear in some of his other solos. They seem to be elongated. For example, the one I just showed, where he has 13 quavers in the time of 16 quavers. The way it's being transcribed are these little cells, occasionally rhythmic cells, where it starts off in 4/4, and then later there are bars of 17/8, 15/8, 3/4. So there are a few unusual changes there in terms of the time signature. For number 9, I've chosen Persona Non Grata. Now, the Persona Non Grata version I'm talking about is the one that was performed at the Palladium in New York in 1978, October 27. This was the solo that was later orchestrated and repurposed for a theme from the third movement of Sinister Footwear that appears on the 1981 album You Are What You Is. Now, in the original solo, it's you can hear this incredible interaction between Zappa and Vinnie Colaiuta. And I think one of the most outstanding things about Zappa's playing with Colaiuta is they're playing these really complicated polyrhythms, but they always know where the one is. Sometimes Colaiuta just sits out, or he plays something really wild, and Zappa is there. You can hear him. He knows where the meter is, and it's really not easy to do. If you try to play these polyrhythms when you're playing over a steady metric pulse, it's very easy to get lost. You really need to know what you're doing. And here are two great musicians interacting very playfully and almost effortlessly. The solo itself, in its original incarnation, is really exciting to listen to. And then, of course, it takes on a different form as it appears on You Are What You Is, as theme from the third movement of Sinister Footwear, where it's been orchestrated with bass clarinet, tuned percussion, and, of course, Steve Vai doubling the guitar solo. And the notes performed on these instruments sound wonderful, almost magical, particularly at the very beginning where you have those pentatonic phrases in the tuned percussion and the bass clarinet. It sounds wonderful. The original solo clocks in at around 8 minutes, and the theme from the third movement is about 3 minutes. Now, if you listen to Persona Non Grata, you can hear where the cuts are if you're already familiar with the third movement. There are 3 cuts altogether. So Zappa has taken out 3 sections of the original solo in preparation for the recording on You Are What You Is. This is just a monument of bold notation. I mean, as I've said many times before, and I'm sure I'll say again, this really is an amazing feat. It's unbelievable to conceive such a thing in an improvisation, you know, and still know where the one is. But almost unbelievable to be able to notate that, because essentially what's happening here is there are 2 tempos momentarily. So you have Vinnie Colaiuta is keeping the metric pulse, at least implying the metric pulse, and Zappa is playing completely different time over that. And so essentially it's 2 tempos. How do you go about notating 2 tempos? Well, this is how you do it. So what's going on here in the second bar of this extract, you can see 4 in the time of 7. That is 4 crotchets in the time of 7 crotchets. If you count the number of crotchets ordinarily from the second beat of the second bar, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're playing 4 in the time of 7. So it's almost like you're slowing the tempo down. Instead of the customary 7 crotchets, you're playing 4 crotchets. Now, as if that's not difficult enough, you then have to imagine that on each crotchet within the 4 in the time of 7, these nested tuplets, triplets, a sextuplet, and more triplets, followed by a couple of demi-semis and then semiquavers. I was reading this interview with Mark Pinsky, where he's talking about Steve Vai coming to the studio to record his part for the third movement of the theme from the third movement of the Sinister Footwear. And apparently Zappa had got all the tracks ready in the studio and the drum track, and requested Steve Vai to record his solo, play along. So I'm assuming that Steve Vai was going to play along to Frank Zappa's guitar track, but Zappa said to Pinsky, take my guitar solo out and let him play the solo with no reference in terms of the guitar solo. Now, when you're transcribing, you usually play along to the solo with your instrument. And in many cases, hearing the solo as you play along to it can give you certain cues or certain indications of where things start, where things stop, certain articulations and things like that. In some cases, it can jog your memory as to when you come in or when a specific phrase happens. But if you take the solo out, of course, if you learned it enough, you can do it without. But it's always easier if you can hear it while you're playing along to it. Zappa's left him in the cold. It's like, here's the backing track. You've transcribed the solo. Now play it without my solo. So apparently he did this, and then later in the studio, after Steve Vai had recorded his part, Zappa brought up his own guitar solo to sort of hear A, B, or whatever, hear the comparison there. And according to Pinsky, Zappa's jaw dropped. He just couldn't believe that Steve Vai had, learned it so well and just nailed it, basically. But Steve Vai said that he wanted to do another take of it because he felt he could do better. But Zappa said, no, just keep it as is. It turns out that Zappa liked the imperfections because it proved to the listener, I guess, that you're hearing my guitar solo, but also Steve Vai playing along to it. So there are slight imperfections there, which indicate that it's not just a stereo track or a stereo performance. And in fact, if you listen carefully, sometimes Steve Vai uses the whammy bar on certain held notes, sustained notes, he will use the whammy bar. He's coming out with the left speaker, by the way. So if you go back and listen to that, Zappa's in the right and Steve Vai's in the left, at least on the recording that I have. And so I found that really interesting. I mean, he really drilled Steve Vai. I mean, talk about being challenged and talk about, rising to that challenge. Napkins was recorded in February 1977 at the Hammersmith Odeon in London, and it features Terry Bozzio on drums and Patrick O'Hearn on bass. It really is a beautiful performance. The chords used for Pink Napkins are the same as those used for Black Napkins. It's just C sharp minor to D major 7. From the outset, Zappa is playing the C-sharp Dorian. With the natural 6. And then D Lydian. It's a kind of nice descending whole tone movement there. And there's a really beautiful accompaniment. Patrick O'Hearn plays these major tenths, where it goes from applying the G7 down to the G flat 7 before going to the D major 7. It's just a lovely chordal movement there. I don't know if this was improvised on the night or whether it had been done before. He's plugged into a Mutron biphase pedal, and he's also using an Eventide harmonizer, the H910, which creates this guitar sound. It's very spacious, there's a lot of air, there's a lot of warmth to it, and there's a lot of high end. It's just got all the necessary frequencies you need, but they're all very rounded, they're all very soft. There's not much harshness to it. Zappa would spend a lot of money on his equipment, on his guitars, modifying and customizing his guitars to get specific sounds. He was forever trying to accomplish that ultimate guitar sound, and then once he had achieved it, he wanted to try and experiment with a different guitar sound. Number 7, I've chosen Carolina Hardcore Ecstasy from Bongo Fury. This solo is a good example of the change that you hear in Frank Zappa's guitar playing when Terry Bozzio is in the band. Now, if you're an improvising musician and you're playing with the specific musicians, you're going to respond to them. Obviously, a successful interaction is where you're responding, where you compromise, and you play according to the specification of the musician you're performing with. So that's why when you hear Zappa soloing with Ralph Humphrey or Chester Thompson, of course, there's the Zappa characteristics in his playing, but it's not as polyrhythmically experimental as it is, let's say, with Vinnie Colaiuta, and probably not as hard-hitting as it is with Terry Bozzio. So Zappa is doing what an improvised musician is supposed to do. He's responding to the musicians he's playing with, but it's interesting to hear the change, him performing with different drummers. And so one of the reasons I like this solo is because it's reflective of the style of Terry Bozzio, that kind of aggressive drumming style, and Zappa's picking up on that. And there's a lot of fast notes, a lot of bouncing off the strings, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and things like that. And there's the one moment in there where Bozzio's doing this fast drum roll, and it's almost like that just by chance they played the same rhythm at the same time. At number 6 is Ship Ahoy from the 1981 album Shut and Play Your Guitar. And mostly consists of Zappa just playing the guitar. And there's not really a steady drum beat or bass part. There are drums in there, and the bass comes in a little bit later on, Roy Estrada and Terry Bozzio, but it's more as a sort of decorative element than a straight-ahead groove. Now, this solo was recorded in Japan in 1976. The main feature is the pedal that Zappa is using, which is the Oberheim VCF 200. Unless you have one, the alternative to get that sound would be the Rob Keeley Bubbletron, which is this pedal. And I'm going to demonstrate the pedal and how you can get that Zappa sound, that VCF 200 sound. At number 5 is Blessed Relief from the 1972 album The Grand Wazoo. Now, this is a gorgeous piece of music, and it has 3 solos. The first is played by Sal Marquez on trumpet, George Duke on keys, and then Frank Zappa takes the final solo. It's really uncharacteristic of Zappa. Not just the solo, but the composition itself. It's just light, gentle, it just sails through. There are no abrupt transitions or juxtapositions. It's just a really sweet, beautiful piece of music. And Zappa is using his Martin D18S guitar. Now, this guitar has an interesting history because it was an exchange between Zappa and Mark Volman. Zappa gave Volman a Telecaster, and Volman gave Zappa the Martin guitar. Now, this guitar is being played through a wah pedal. I'm pretty sure it's a wah-wah pedal. And it's a lovely sound, really soft and delicate sound with you know, beautiful phrases and melodic lines. And the solo chords are F sharp minor, down to E major 7, A minor 7, down to G minor 7, and then back to F sharp minor. Usually Zappa's solos are played over one chord. They're just one chord vamps. So I like to hear him play over changes, and he does it well. You know, he doesn't have the jazz vocabulary necessarily, which doesn't really matter at all. But he does. In fact, I would just comment on that. Sometimes if you don't have a jazz vocabulary, you're more inclined to use your ears. You're more inclined to take chances. Sometimes you can get stuck in the world of any vocabulary, really. And I think that's what's interesting about Zappa's playing, is that, yes, he's got standard riffs and ideas and calling cards, whatever you want to call them, that he plays, that every guitarist needs. That's your distinct sound. That's your style, is that you go for certain sounds, certain things, so people can identify you there. And I think Zappa is in some cases a better improviser for it, because he can really use his ears. And in fact, sometimes you hear him play a solo, it might be like 10, 15 minutes long. It's a long solo, and you know, it demands your attention. But you have to bear that in mind, you know, the concept of it. It's not just you listen to the solo and you listen to a guitarist meander. What you're actually hearing is a guitarist trying to find ideas on the spot, has no preconceived ideas, no stock licks or anything. This is a courageous effort to go out and perform in front of thousands of people with nothing prepared in terms of your guitar solos. And so when you're listening to a solo that goes on for a while, that's what's exciting about it, because you can hear from time to time, he just all of a sudden he is inspired by an idea and he goes with it. It's a continuous exploration of finding an idea that you've never played before, playing a musical idea for the first time. And Zappa has exemplified this throughout his career. And I think that's what's interesting, but also difficult about his solos. Difficult in the sense that some people find it hard to listen to. But if you think of it in that way, you realize that here's a musician who's really trying to find something. And number 4 is Black Napkins, which appeared on the 1976 album Zoot Allures. The actual solo was recorded in Japan in February 1976 and just has some great interplay between Bosio and Zappa. The reason I wanted to talk about this solo is not just that it's a great solo, but also it's an example of the type of template that was expanded on in Zappa's playing throughout his career. The template I'm referring to is the Story of My Life guitar solo by Guitar Slim. Now, Zappa lauded Guitar Slim, and in particular this solo. You can hear him talk about it in many different interviews. The spirit is there, the characteristics are there throughout his playing. One particular nuance or technique, if you like, is the note reiteration. It's like he's taken this one solo and just extended it into many different areas of his music, whether it's a guitar solo or a composition. Black Napkins was performed in different incarnations, different bands, different instrumentation. But this one is stripped back with chords in the background and bass, just playing the root notes mostly. And so most of the action and the excitement is between Bosio and Zappa. For number 3, I chose Sleep Dirt, which was recorded in 1974 and is basically a duet between Zappa and James Birdlegs Yeomans. It's another recording featuring Zappa's Martin D18S. What you have here is a B minor 9 chord going down to a G sharp minor 7 flat 5. So B minor, G sharp minor 7 flat 5. Now over those chords you just can play the B Dorian. And you can play the D Dorian over those 2 chords because those 2 chords are related. And they're part of the A major scale. B Dorian being the 2nd mode and G sharp minor 7 flat 5, the 7th mode of A major. So the B Dorian works over those chords. A D major over F sharp to a G minor would imply a kind of 1-4-1 cadence, if you like. There's a D major, the 4 resolving back to the 1, or to the F sharp minor, but the F sharp minor is related to D as well. And takes it out of the A major tonality, so the chord change has to be made, and you can hear Zappa playing. It then goes down to this F, D, A flat. Now Zappa plays an interesting scale over that chord. What it is the E harmonic minor flat 2. You got the flat 2, flat 3rd, 4, 5, flat 6, major 7, root. It probably has some other name, some exotic name, but to me it's a harmonic minor with a flat 2. You can also play the F diminished, but Zappa chooses that. And then he goes to the E Phrygian sound, which instead of the major 7th, you have the flat 7. Back to the B Dorian, and then the B moves down to B flat, and you get B flat, D, D flat. Which is like a diminished chord. It moves down to A, get an A major to A flat. Then it goes down to G, which is the G Lydian. And then G major. And number 2 is Yo Mama from Shake Your Booty. This is another example of xenochrony where parts were performed in different places and then put together in the studio. The backing tracks were recorded in the Hammersmith Odeon in London. The guitar solo was recorded in 1978 in Germany. It's one of the first albums that I ever heard alongside Bongo Fury, and that solo struck me. When I first heard that sound, I was like, wow, that's really exotic sounding, that. What is happening there? And of course, what he's doing here is implying the G sharp minor 7 flat 5 over the E mixolydian. And of course, you got the customary the slides and the pull-offs and hammer-ons on the low E string. It's a great sound. No other guitarist does that. You know, Zappa, that is a Zappa thing right there. You know, most guitarists of the time, you know, the stereotype guitarist is up the high end of the neck, you know, bending away, and Zappa's down here. Brilliant. It's got this wonderful synthesizer extravaganza just before the guitar solo, and I was reading somewhere, I think it was an interview with Tommy Mars, where he said Zappa would let him just, you know, run amok, just do whatever you want for this little section. So Tommy Mars had composed these parts that were layered, different synthesizers, and it's just such a majestic sound and really beautiful and leads so well into the guitar solo. At number 1, has to be Shake Your Booty Tango. How often do you hear a solo that's just based on the whole tone scale? You know, because usually it's just a complementary thing. It's a passing thing. The whole tone scale is a symmetrical scale. It has that sound that just keeps going on because there are no intervals in there that give the indication that it's going to resolve to anything. So you need to use it as a tension device that is then going to resolve. You know, the cliche example would be, but it doesn't resolve. And it doesn't have to resolve. And that's what's so cool about this solo, is that the whole tone scale is in your face. Every time I hear it, I can't help laugh and smile. Just the audacity to just play that whole tone scale in that way. But because it's done with such attitude and such conviction, that is my top 10 Frank Zappa guitar solos. Like I said, if you think I've missed anything or I should have put something else in there, then please do let me know in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.